I'm so excited to introduce our keynote speaker, Paul Brody. He is the Global Blockchain Lead at Ernst & Young, EY. And Paul, I'm not going to give you the microphone right away because I'm going to have to rip on you a little bit. So this man has been a visionary. I mean, our Blockchain Center of Excellence has talked to literally thousands of companies and startups in the 5 years we've been. And this is the man 5 years ago who said enterprises will be doing completely compliant and confidential transactions on public, yes, I said public blockchains. And years ago, Paul, everybody thought you were crazy, but he and EY helped create this. They have developed and donated millions of dollars worth of software code. They've developed protocols and given that to the open source community. So thank you for helping to make Web3 a reality. So Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much. It is a delight to be here. This is my second visit to Arkansas in my life. I was here 30 years ago and I got to meet Sam Walton, which was an amazing experience, which I sort of wrote about this morning. But this town, this industry, all of the focus here is really driven by the incredible level of innovation and entrepreneurship that has come from this ecosystem that Walmart has created. And I also want to thank Mary, because I think she might be the hardest working person in blockchain. Honestly, she writes books, she teaches classes, right? She goes to conferences, she is a thought leader. It's really, really incredible. And in particular, the University of Arkansas Blockchain Center of Excellence does incredible work in bringing enterprises into this focus. Now, I'm told that I'm also being broadcast in a big church nearby, and I'm 2 feet tall, so I'm ready to go ahead and preach to you the gospel of Ethereum. So feel free to shout amen when I talk about the new Ethereum world order. At EY, when you are an enterprise and you have to make really careful strategic decisions, you have to think about how are you going to deploy your resources. And I often feel like I'm like Dr. No at EY, because people are like, can we do this on Hyperledger? No. Can we do this on? No, right? And the reason for that is a couple of things. Number one, I really fundamentally, deeply believe that only public blockchains are worthwhile. There is, and I'll come back to this, but there really is no point to a centrally run decentralized ledger. The hint is in the name. And then secondly, I think you have to go with the biggest ecosystem, because that's where enterprises tend to sort of gravitate. So ecosystems are imperfect, but they are really what drives engagement and participation and network value. Now, apparently there's some problem with the slide advancing, so I'm going to say next slide, please, a lot, because I had a couple animations in here. Normally, I blow through my slides pretty quickly. Let's go to the next one here. I'm going to hit four key messages here. Number one, kind of what's changing in the market. Number two, what should you do in this kind of new blockchain ecosystem? What is EY doing? What is our secret 4-point plan for global domination? And then lastly, how do we see the world moving ahead? So let's go to the first section, which is new market, new rules. So next slide, every kind of blockchain and technology ecosystem goes through a bunch of phases of evolution, right? We start with this exciting early adopter surge where people are like, oh my gosh, blockchain does everything. We can make better coffee and end food poisoning and cure democracy, right? And then we get to this part where it's like, wow, this is actually a lot harder than we thought. And by the way, I believe, in particular in the world of enterprise, the hard thing in blockchain is privacy, right? I've had a lot of discussions where I've told people, there is no scaling problem for enterprises if you do not solve the privacy problem, right? So financial services, like if I'm buying and selling an undifferentiated commodity through an exchange, you can't tell what I'm doing. But if I'm making and selling a unique item, or I'm moving it back and forth, privacy really, really matters. And now it turns out we hit an inflection point in terms of growth without privacy. And we are now in a mainstream growth period, although it's not driven by enterprises. But we enterprises want to come and join the party. And then eventually, I think somewhere around year 18, somewhere in the range of 10 years from now or 15 years from now, we will get to the late adopters. But right now, we are in this mainstream adoption period. And I'll come back to what that means. But that's That's a period of rapid, sort of intense growth, and all tech ecosystems go through that, right? And when you go into a mainstream adoption phase, the rules change, right? The rules change at this inflection point, right? It's less about, what should we do, and we're much more about, okay, there's now clear adoption and we need to go do it. Next slide, please. So there's three things right now that are driving the mainstream adoption phase, right? The first are cryptocurrencies and NFTs, and there's some enterprise and business usage, but this is mostly consumer product. DeFi is the one really big enterprise activity that's going to reshape finance that's already maturing. DeFi is going to completely transform finance. It lets you take something that used to require a large, substantial institution and turn it into a few lines of code. And I can tell you, because I get to talk to CEOs of banks and chairmen of banks all the time, they're really worried. And I personally think for good reason. DeFi is transformational. And it's not just regulatory arbitrage. For sure, the world of DeFi is not following all the regulations, but mostly that's because they don't know what the regulations are yet. But when the regulations come, they will still adapt to those regulations. DeFi will still be transformational. And then I think DAOs are going to be transformational as well. They are a new form of organization. In some ways, they're a reinvention of organization models that have been around for a while. I mean, EY, we're a partnership. Right? We do staking. I had to buy in to our partnership, and if I misbehave, I can get slashed. Right? I'm not looking forward to that, but it's a real thing. Right? But DAOs make partnerships massively scalable and digital, and they will have significant governance impacts. How many of you are a member of a DAO? Right? Oh, we got some diehard DAO members here, but I'll give you a really amazing example. There's a DAO called MakerDAO, and they vote on like everything. They vote on all the kind of key issues. At one time, somebody tabled a proposal expressing some dissatisfaction basically with their marketing team. It was debated, discussed, voted on, and approved, and the marketing team was fired. Make sure you have good OKRs if you ever work in a DAO, because at some point you may have to defend your track record. Next slide, please. In terms of where the ecosystem is going, right? One thing we should expect is that although we're in a mainstream adoption period, these three use cases are just getting started, right? In the PC era, we still have PCs. We're still coming up with new uses for them. Nobody expected that audio and video editing would be part of the PC application suite back in the 1980s, right? So every digital ecosystem, including blockchain and crypto, will continue to have an endless stream of new use cases. Right? The one thing I do think that will be different is once you hit a critical mass, the use case isn't just, is blockchain the perfect way to do this? The use case becomes, I have 30, 50 million addressable or 100 million addressable customers with money in their digital wallets. What can I sell to them? Right? The network, in a sense, becomes the use case. Let's go to the next page. Now, let's talk about the gospel of Ethereum. So long before the merge, Ethereum was already really the dominant kind of programmable blockchain ecosystem. Now, I think after the merge, though, what the merge really did was sort of solidify, especially for enterprise users, this understanding that this like motley crew of anarchists and developers and random people that seem kind of disorganized could migrate one of the largest pieces of financial infrastructure in the world overnight without a hiccup. Right? And by the way, it took them forever to do so, and I would make the argument, not that that is a failing, but that is a kind of boring institutional maturity that I would like as an enterprise user. I don't want move fast and break things when you're running your entire business infrastructure on a piece of software. So I personally believe Ethereum is going to become the dominant, or really has become the dominant blockchain ecosystem. And it will take some time for other ecosystems to fade away. But Metcalfe's law, the domination of kind of network-centric models, means that once you reach a certain point, it's really hard to unseat those players, right? We're still using the same PC operating systems as 30 years ago, right? I guarantee you 25 years from now, we'll probably still be using the same mobile phone operating systems, right? It's not because these are the best or the best possible. It's that once you get to a certain point, that the power of the legacy infrastructure kind of becomes unbeatable unless you really mess it up. Next slide, please. And I guess this animation didn't come out very well, but my point was more to, like, Ethereum is, as I mentioned, demonstrating a lot of operational maturity. People don't realize that Ethereum has been doing a hard fork about every 3 months for years. Every 3 months for many years, Ethereum has been putting out small incremental improvements. We can expect this to continue over the next few years. And by the way, after the merge and a 99.5% reduction in carbon footprint, we can expect some much more, from an operational standpoint, exciting things, including a stateless architecture, sharding, and other tools that will really make capacity much higher. The merge didn't actually do a lot for Ethereum capacity. It's still about 1 million, 2 million transactions a day. I estimate that to bring on a bunch of major industries, we eventually need to get to somewhere in the region of 4 to 6 billion transactions a day. That's just for industrial applications. To give you an idea, I have an EY client that for one product line wants to mint 500,000 NFTs a day, right? One for each serialized output. That's one product. And that product moves 4 times, which means that a single product line will generate 2 million transactions a day forever, right? For full supply chain and operational traceability. Next slide, please. So, if the world is changing, if we're moving towards Ethereum, what do we need to do? How will our market and operation and activities change? Next slide, please. So, the plunge in crypto markets has really, I think, rearranged a little bit of priorities. I think if I were giving this speech 6 or 9 months ago, I would say many of you would be super focused on finance. I'm much more of an industrial guy. I spent 15 years at IBM doing really boring stuff like supply chain management. I spent a year in Wichita, Kansas on an aircraft production line, right? I care about, like, how you make stuff and you move it around. And I think that the plunge in finance plunge in financial services and DeFi has been helpful in shifting a little bit of the mindset towards real-world assets and industrial applications. Next slide, please. On the finance side, we're still going to see a lot of innovation, and I think I'm just going to go to the next slide. In particular, I think there's a few kind of things that we can expect. Number one, we're pretty much at the saturation point for cryptocurrencies and NFTs. If you want them, you have them. Who's got, like, an NFT? Everyone's got an. Everyone who wants an NFT can get one. Although I have to say, it's still a miserable user experience, isn't it? Right? People are like, oh, it's easy, just get an NFT. First you open up an account with an exchange, and then you get yourself a separate wallet, and then you send that money to the wallet, and then you take that wallet and you connect it to a website. Make sure it's a legitimate website, and then if you haven't been robbed blind by the time you do it, you can bid on an NFT, and it may or may not belong to you. So I can concede that if you want an NFT, it's certainly available. It's not the greatest user experience yet, but it is going to get better. Where I do think things are going is we're headed towards DeFi, mainstream adoption of DeFi, right? I personally expect by the end of this year, early next year, we're going to see some of the big fintech players not just letting you buy Ether or Bitcoin, but letting you choose from a curated selection of DeFi services. Do you want to park some money in the deposit contract? Do you want to borrow against an asset? I think you'll be able to do that through a very nice, clean, easy user interface from one of the big fintech players. What I'm super excited about is this, supply chain traceability. So that's rapidly maturing, right? And what it goes to when you can have privacy is supply chain management and eventually business contracts and payments. If I know what I have and I know where it is, then I could theoretically, if I had good privacy, I could use a smart contract to enable backwards and forward the full purchase, right? Almost all business contracts basically boil down to, I got money and you got stuff and we want to exchange my money for your stuff. Eventually, though, we'll get to supply chain management, and then following that, tax and regulatory compliance as organizational agreements get more complex. Next page. So, I mentioned this before, but one of the things that really sort of was an aha moment for me in thinking about B2B was this. Every business process can be ported to a blockchain environment for management, right? If our agreement is money for stuff, the money and the stuff can be represented as digital tokens, right? The exchange of money for stuff under the terms of an agreement can be managed with a smart contract. Smart contract is just a business process that I can run across multiple organizational boundaries, right? Think about, how any large company, of which there's a few here, buy things, right? They don't just go and buy like financial services. They cultivate long-term relationships with suppliers. They have special terms and agreements, and those suppliers make products specifically for them, right? That means you need special tokens, probably NFTs, right, and smart contracts to execute them. And then if you'd like to know what happened, you need some analytics to go with it. So with these three things, I ought to be able to manage any B2B business conceivable. Next slide. All right. And that comes to, if you ask people at EY, what do I think blockchain really adds up to, it's this. I believe blockchains will do for business ecosystems what ERP did inside the enterprise. Now, how many of you are familiar with ERP? How many of you have been through an ERP implementation and post-ERP implementation psychiatric therapy? It's traumatic, right? But ERP was transformational. Right? This idea of like having everybody in the company on the same rules, on the same page about process and data is incredible, right? Everybody, in the old days before ERP, you said how much inventory we have, everybody sort of guessed. After ERP, you knew, and everybody had the same definition. The problem with ERP is it comes to a screeching halt at the boundary of your enterprise. Right? It's really, really hard. All the sophisticated tools we build inside of our enterprises for managing process and data, right? We go back to like emailing each other PDF forms that we can scan into the system for purchase orders, right? That's like high-tech integration, right? Most large companies still use EDI for communication, right? EDI is business-to-business text messaging. I mean, it's an amazing business. Did you know when I was a kid, EDI, they charged per character? I mean, what a business. Right? Okay, next page. So we're going to get there, but it's going to take a while, right? And we're going to see, I believe, in the world of blockchain, a very similar evolution to what we saw on the internet. And the results on the internet were very predictable, right? We started with a bunch of basic building blocks. And then we immediately took the offline thing and made a really awful version of it online, right? I mean, I once spent an entire weekend ripping all of my CDs only to have the hard drive crash at like 11 p.m. on Sunday night, right? Ripping CDs was a traumatic, horrible experience, right? But eventually we made a better version of the offline experience. And eventually we started like remixing things, right? I think if you had told me that you one day would be able to buy a celebrity chef branded burger, right, by a celebrity chef who has no restaurants, made through cloud kitchens and delivered through ride-sharing services, I'd been like, that's crazy, right? You need to do fewer drugs, right? But that's kind of what happened, right? Eventually, you end up with stuff that is wildly unpredictable, that's on nobody's bingo card, right? And we are, in the world of blockchain, we're here. Do you want a completely difficult to use, incredibly fraud-prone, simple banking system? We have one of those for you right now, right? Would you like to risk your life savings in an incredibly risky way? We can do that today, right? We are approaching the let's do it better phase, right? But once we have these Legos, right, finance Legos, operations Legos together, eventually we will figure out how to remix them, right? I don't know what horrific end state solution we will have, but it will not be predictable. That's the only thing I can promise you, right? And where we will get a ton of disruption is just in doing the offline thing way better. It's coming, right? And people who look at the current version and say, it'll never work, are just like the people who used to look at the early version of like web delivery service and like, no one's going to order delivery, grocery delivery online. We all do today. So, that is how this process works. Next slide, please. All right. The question remains, why bother, right? So, blockchains are really difficult to implement, right? Everything about blockchain is difficult. So why should we do this? And the reason is simple, right? We are living through the golden age of digital monopolies, right? All these companies that connect buyers and sellers, they start out with a great idea. I'm just going to connect some people with a bit of ride sharing. I'm just going to connect some third-party, sellers with a marketplace, right? They never stop there, right? Eventually, thanks to Metcalfe's law, they become monopolies. That is how Web 2.0 works. You get monopolies, right? It's almost impossible to avoid, right? The beauty, the attraction of Web 3 is that potentially we can have all the power of Web 2 without the monopoly part. Or maybe a better way to say it is, Ethereum can become a monopoly, but because it is a public good, it is a monopoly in which the participants get back all the value they create. Right? And that is, to me, that is the why bother with this incredibly difficult, complicated process, which involves a ridiculous amount of computational redundancy. The answer is because we want to create value and we want the participants in the value ecosystem to keep the value that they created. Right? And if we do this right, we are creating a fundamentally fairer global economic system, not just a more efficient one. Next slide. So what is the EY plan for world domination in this very altruistic, positive ecosystem? There are 4 parts to it, if we go to the next slide. And it's kind of simple. One is we do our very traditional services, assurance, financial statement audits, that kind of thing. And by the way, we are quite unique. We are the only sort of big audit firm that has heavily invested in core assurance audit technology for crypto assets, right? Secondly, to me, the one that's really, really important is we are trying to solve the one thing that I believe is holding back widespread enterprise participation from public blockchains, and that's privacy, right? If people can see what you're buying and how much you're paying, they are not going to use it. Right? There's no large company that's going to say, yeah, I'm totally fine with my competition seeing what I'm buying and how much I'm paying. That's just not how it works. So our big focus has been on privacy. I'm going to come back to that. And then once we figured out, even before fully figuring out privacy, we're helping our clients use what is possible, right, in terms of building on the blockchain through our application called EY Ops Chain, and then also understanding the ecosystem. And I'll talk briefly about sort of the things that we're doing. Next slide, please. All right, so privacy is the most critical thing, right? The distributed ledger only works, at least in its native format, if everybody can verify everybody else's stuff. Like that's kind of Bitcoin 101, right? And that's a big problem. If we go to the next slide. So what are we doing about this? There's 3 things that we're focused on. Number 1, nightfall. So if you think about a basic smart contract or a business agreement, I got money, you've got stuff, and we're exchanging my money for your stuff under the terms of an agreement. What Nightfall does is it allows you to move the money and the stuff under full privacy, right? This allows enterprises to mint tokens, move them around, to manage their supply chain and other assets with complete privacy from their competition. And I want to be clear, by the way, when I talk about privacy, I mean privacy from your competition, not privacy from the regulators. Secondly, Starlight. Starlight is a early stage. It's soon going to be in beta. It is really cool. It allows you to take a traditional smart contract that's public and recompile it as a zero-knowledge circuit. It allows you to basically create something we're calling zaps. So people used to talk about dApps. A zap is a zero-knowledge application that you can run with full privacy on the public blockchain. And what this lets us do is allows us to do things like business logic, right? So then you can have you've got the money and the stuff moving under Nightfall. You've got the business logic with Starlight, and I now have the tools to do a complete business-to-business transaction with privacy on a public, fully decentralized network. And then Baseline Protocol is a set of tools that are designed to help companies make use of this. Now I'm running a little bit out of time, so I'm going to go more quickly, if that's possible. People assume I'm from New York because I talk really fast. I'm not actually, but I try to take that as a compliment. Next page. Nightfall is coming. It's currently in beta on the Ethereum testnet. It will shortly be live on the Ethereum mainnet, and we're working with Polygon to stand that up as a layer 2 ZK optimistic rollup, for those of you who know what that is. Next slide. In terms of ops chain, so our ops chain platform allows companies to do pretty basic things like mint tokens, move them around, NFTs, trace raw materials. What's particularly exciting is that once privacy is deployed, you can not just do like traceability, you can do inventory management. How many widgets do we have and where are they? But you can only do that once you're confident that you have real privacy. Next slide. We can mint NFTs. We send our Christmas cards and New Year's cards now as NFTs, which is a really fun thing to do. Next page. Blockchain Analyzer, reconcile transactions, test smart contracts, and calculate things like capital gains. It's really basic analytics. It's foundational to audit, right? In the audit business, you really want to know, like, hey, I gave an exchange $1,000. Did they buy that Bitcoin for me or not, right? With Blockchain Analyzer, we can basically say, here's your ERP data, here's your on-chain data, prove to us, show us that you have these assets, you bought them for this customer, and you have control over them. Really simple stuff, but honestly, like, if you're buying through an exchange that's not audited, move your money. All right? There are ways, you know, Web3 is whiskey, there are ways, risky, it's also a lot of whiskey. There are ways to avoid being conned. It's not perfect. I have been robbed. I don't know anybody who hasn't at one point been robbed, but you can take reasonable steps to prevent that. Next page. Next page, I think I'll skip that one in the interest of time. Okay, thinking ahead, 3 final messages to leave you with. Next page, please. So I talk to executives all the time, and I think executives at large companies make 3 really fundamental mistakes. Number 1, they underestimate the power of compound growth. Number 2, they overcomplicate the platform decision. Number 3, they lack a sense of urgency. Next slide, please. When it comes to compound growth, it's really very simple. Ecosystems that are going through their mainstream adoption phase typically go through 15 years of growth that averages 27% a year. That means in year 1, $1 of revenue is worth about $36 in year 15, right? So every time you think about how big is a business or is it big enough to interest me, whatever it is for blockchain, just multiply that by 36 and ask yourself again, is that a business I'd be interested in? Because if it's 36 times larger, and next slide, the perspective is very different, right? Well, I made this slide in better days, right? But 36 times 1.5 trillion or whatever it is, it's a lot, right? The global stock market, when I made this slide, was 100 trillion. It's a little bit lower too. It hasn't fallen quite as much as crypto, but you know, these things are huge, right? You know, think about the big exchanges. They're doing $4 billion a day. 15 years from now, they'll be doing $135 billion a day in transactions. Next slide. Smart contracts. So this is the other thing, right? People think, oh my gosh, which blockchain should I use? There's so much noise on Twitter. It's really very simple. Ethereum is 95% of all NFTs, 75% of all DeFi. Stop thinking about this decision. Just build on Ethereum. Next slide, please. Lastly, sense of urgency, okay? Technology businesses are not just winner-take-all or winner-take-most businesses. They're also businesses in which the first company to have a really substantial leading position is the one that keeps that position. It's not an accident that, you know, SAP invented ERP in 1992. They're still on top of this market, right? I always tell people at EY, I show them a chart, I say, you want to know why I'm running my hair on fire with a sense of urgency? It's because we need to go fast and win, right? If you want to win this business, you need to go at the beginning. Next slide. Last message. You need to go now because, as they say in Amazon, there is no compression algorithm for experience, right? You want to play in this game, there is only one way to learn, and that is to do. You cannot write white papers, you need to do. And I am sorry, I'm 1 minute over. Next slide. That's it, thank you, you've been an amazing audience. It's really an honor to be here.